Welcome to State of Tech, Synechron's innovation podcast. Synechron is a leading global digital transformation consulting firm focused on financial services and big technology organizations. Our State of Tech podcast hosts subject matter experts and business leaders as they explore emerging technologies, industry insights, innovation trends, and more. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to the latest edition of the Synechron State of Tech podcast series, where we ignite conversations that matter. I'll be your host, Joyce Pogge, steering today's dialogue to the heart of innovation, why AI-powered analytics are a must-have for data-driven decision-making. I'm excited to introduce Mr. George Vega, who will be joining us today. With his 35-year-long career holding key positions at renowned organizations and a solid educational background, George brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to our conversation. Welcome, George.
Great to be here.
So happy to have you, George. Thank you for coming to see us today. Let's kick things off with your insights on the hurdles businesses face in the era of big data. What challenges are they facing, particularly when it comes to data collection and interpretation?
You know, in financial services, data has been such an important asset. And for many years, the foundational structures and the challenges that were faced 30 years ago, in some contexts, are still the same ones. We aspire to have structured data or convert unstructured data into structured data so it can be processed through our transaction systems, stored in one place and made available to many different functional groups to perform their functions. Well, today, even on that journey, some firms have done a great job, but we still struggle with data governance. You know, having centralized or federated data governance groups that can well define data in a way that it's the same data used by many different applications, but it means the same to all applications. We still have a tremendous amount of data sprawl. Data for firms that have been able to wrangle it, structure it, source it centrally, perform high quality tests against it, and use it, have done very, very well. And many of the retail companies, certainly the credit card companies, do that very well, and they use data as a weapon. But in most organizations, still even today, there are many different data sources. They're largely undefined in some cases or untrusted sources. We don't have the level of quality. And as a result, many folks use many different reporting tools. And on any given day, it's not uncommon for different functional groups to produce a different result using the same implied data. And that's because we don't have the standardization, the quality testing against it. So I think the challenges, for the most part, certainly in different industries, I think capital markets and banking are kind of well ahead in terms of structuring data, standardizing data, making it accessible in a very consistent way to different development or quantitative groups. I think in industries like insurance and others, where they don't have that standardization, that industry standardization, so it's very, very hard as we see greater centralization or aggregation of different suppliers. It's very hard to still manipulate the data in a much more standard way, and it takes a lot of people and a lot of effort.
Yeah, definitely. And can you shed some light on how AI and analytics are reshaping the financial services landscape? How are these advances influencing how firms approach long-term strategy and innovation?
You know, for the first time in a long time, you know, a data-first strategy actually has come to kind of the top of the house, just in terms of many more firms are business case-driven, data-driven. And candidly, it's important. It's important that it's right. It's important that it's trusted. And it's important that it's consistent. So one, on the very positive side, the business case for data, data warehousing, big data, I think it's truly kind of come to a point where organizations realize that it's a necessity. It's no longer an option, or it's no longer just another initiative. It's really part of the way that we do work. You know, what we're seeing in terms of the advances, you know, of generative AI, large language models, is that it's bringing it together faster. So if you think about how we used to work, you know, we would have an idea, it would go to one functional group, it would be stress tested by another group, and then it would go through the pipeline. By the time it finished, you were 6 months into a potential idea with a potential hypothesis based on the intrinsic knowledge of the subject matter experts that were bringing it forward. Now, you can actually take a very small cross-functional team. They truly have access to all the information, structured and unstructured. That same business case, which used to take months to develop, can develop, much sooner. So if you're in a strategy office, you no longer need to, lay off a particular question to a research group that will analyze it for months. You actually have at your fingertips all the information, external, internal, to actually validate your hypothesis and determine fairly quickly whether or not that strategy actually makes sense to kind of move forward. At a very different level, how has it influenced strategy? More and more firms are moving more towards product management or product management-led functions. If you're a product manager, what do you need? You need data, you need information to define not only the product journey, understand the viability of the product, personalize that product to different target markets and constituents. So the personalization that traditionally we've talked about in the context of marketing, campaign marketing, making insights more meaningful to segmented audiences. Now you can actually truly understand different segments of your market, different segments of your customers. You can churn through data fairly quickly and figure out what those insightful nuggets are, and then send them either through an advice professional or candidly through a much more personalized email or meeting function and deliver value sooner rather than just send a bunch of unwanted noise that most people actually delete or don't even listen to because it's really not about them.
So it's safe to say that AI is a game changer. And speaking of change, how do you see AI carving out the future of employment and financial services? What shifts in skills and job roles might we anticipate?
If you think about the technologies that really have come pretty quickly in the last 12 months around large language models and generative AI, even ChatGPT, these technologies have been around for over 20 years. What's different is that we're able to now make them much more consumable and make them much more available to effectively everyone. So I think some of the changes is, if you think back 25, 30 years ago in the mortgage industry, there were many actuarial models that existed. Data was always in use and has been in use in that industry just to make smart risk decisions and loan decisions. But there was unfair bias in many of those formulas, and certain segments of a market were just unfairly treated relative to others. I think now that data is much more available, ensuring that, number one, the data is truly tested, that there are no biases, any of the queries, the formulas, the models, I think is something that for financial services is paramount. From a pure defensive perspective, I think data needs to be trusted. We learned early on, more in the research area, where different data sources were being used to calculate different values. So the ability to disclose the underlying data sources is going to be critically important, not only because of potentially the suggestions and the insights, but people will always ask, so how did you come up with that? And what was your underlying data? So again, data governance becomes critically important. Underlying data sources, trusted data sources, critically important, only because it's going to be much more available to all areas of an organization, and you want to be able to have that lineage and be able to disclose that. I'd say the last piece also is, there's going to be, today, every supporting functional group, legal, compliance, policy writers, there is going to be an explosion in terms of the skills, in terms of how do they think about commercially, how do they think about ensuring not only, and not inhibiting, but ensuring that as this technology, since it's going to be embedded into every third-party package, every company will be using it, we will have large language model wars where there'll be a buy side and a sell side with using very similar models to stress test or quality test against each other. So the consistency is going to be critically important, but all those functional groups that today have a responsibility to ensuring that, all data that is processed internally, that's used externally, are secure, have integrity, and candidly, kind of perform up to the internal standards. I think those groups are going to have to start to think about how do they transform and use technology to ensure that the data actually meets a certain standard before it's actually released outside the firm.
Yes, absolutely. And, we really can't talk about AI without mentioning the growing conversation around ethics and societal impact. So, George, from your vantage point, what ethical considerations and potential societal impacts should we be mindful of, particularly as AI becomes more deeply integrated into financial services?
There is a bit of an explosion. I think for the first time, when we think back, other technologies that have been deployed, for the first time, I believe, the difference between generative AI and analytics at the point that we're at today is that the ideation in terms of what it can do is far exceeding our ability for our workforce to transform itself to be able to do. So of course, that would imply, a potential kind of displacement. Using this technology today, you can take many, many different processes, but let's just take a simple one. Today, you could take a function like claims management. Claims management might have, 50 to 100 different people processing claims, analyzing claims, responding to claims, and that process is pretty laborious, probably goes across multiple different data sources, is double-checked and triple-checked by different groups. And if we wanted to today with existing technology, but even in the future, functions like that will likely go and be above 90% automated, where you will now have probably a highly skilled domain expert that's reviewing what the model is suggesting and responding to that sooner. But it's largely going to be fully automated. So the ability to take the workforce, take the 100 plus resources that might have just been working on that one function, and now ask, how do you think about the work that you do, and how do you transform yourself? How do you actually go through a development and a personal development program to think about that next level, the next plateau of using these tools to do your job or a different job very differently? That is moving at a slower pace than the technology to automate is. And that's probably the first time that we've seen that displacement. I think over time, if you think back to decimalization, or if you think back to the dot-com stage, or even the more recent cloud journey, people saw that. They had plenty of time to prepare themselves for it. And then, of course, that transformation was fine. I think here it's much more disruptive.
Of course. And before we wrap up, George, I really want to look over the horizon. What are some emerging AI technologies that could further revolutionize financial operations? And how should companies prepare for these changes?
Well, I'll tell you, I think, it is just such an exciting time, I think, for all of us. I think there are so many great ideas out there, not only in the marketplace, but I'm sure every company is thinking through, what can we do with this? So I think step one, I think, is start small, start slow. Ensure you have the proper internal policy, the proper legal and compliance oversight over it, and have the proper data governance. I think certainly in parallel, start to identify the types of use cases that actually have a commercial viable impact, either for growth or for efficiency, but start with a couple. Develop frameworks around how organizations should step into it so that it's not a scramble where every organization, every functional group is approaching this technology in their own way. Start with a couple, start with the framework, and have a methodology around how to approach where you use this technology. Because candidly, a lot of the technology that many people think about with generative AI already exists today in its current form. But the value is for organizations, so they start this transformation using this, is to take an opportunity to reimagine some critical processes. Think of them end to end. Don't think about it as a point solution in terms of the inefficiency you might find. Think about it end to end, where you actually have the customer experience in mind. You have the right proper uses of data and data governance in mind, where it reinforces the internal company controls. And then ultimately, make the process simpler and consumable and more efficient so it scales. Because once you have that with 2 or 3, then you have an organization that can repeat that function and truly kind of modernize the way that they work, increase the level of productivity internally, but do it in a way that actually has commercial, meaningful impact. We saw early on with data analytics, a lot of great ideas, and there were so many different innovations that candidly went nowhere outside of that one innovation because it wasn't able to scale. I think with AI, I think my advice would be, even though the market is changing very fast and there's so much hype in the media about this, don't let that be the reason why you don't really think about this from an end-to-end perspective and a much more commercial, customer-centric perspective.
That's certainly great advice, George. Thank you so much for these forward-looking insights. It's really clear that as AI makes its way across many aspects of the industry, staying ahead really means staying informed and adaptable. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of our State of Tech podcast series. We look forward to your presence at our next installment, but until then, stay engaged and stay tech savvy. See you soon. Thanks for listening to the Synechron State of Tech podcast. Don't forget to like and share this episode, and subscribe to stay up to date on all of the latest and innovative technologies savvy businesses need to know about. To learn more about Synechron, head to our website at www.synechron.com. Stay tuned.